Hi there, and welcome to the Byline podcast from the Byline Times with me, Adrian Goldberg. This episode being recorded live via the Byline Times Substack. And this time we're focusing on the Epstein files, the darkness they embody, the light now being shone on their contents. This topic will take much of the upcoming issue of the print edition of the Byline Times, edited by Hardeep Matharu. He joins us, plus Peter Jukes, co-founder and executive editor of Byline Times. And Hardeep, I want to start with you. There are so many strands to this story. The tragic industrial scale trafficking and abuse of young women, of girls, and awful though that is only the start. Epstein is also the story of high finance and political influence across continents, which has already seen Andrew Mountbatten Windsor deprived of his royal title, Peter Mandelson disgraced in a scandal that shook the UK government. And yet you can't help feel that this story still has a long way to go.
Yeah, I think it does, Adrian. And I think what was so meaningful about putting this latest edition together was exactly what you're saying. I think it was about understanding how the Epstein files came to be released and what that required of all of the survivors of Epstein's abuse, without which it would not have happened. But now we have these files, and especially the latest tranche, 3 million documents, emails, photographs. I think we can begin to piece together some of the underlying forces of the disruptions to sort of politics and culture and society that we have experienced in the past 10 years. And of course, Byline Times has been doing that structural work for a long time. But even for us as journalists, it's pretty extraordinary to see in writing the things that we instinctively and factually felt were happening, just from piecing together various of our own information, speaking to people, but to have it sort of typed up and shared with the world. I think it is a seminal moment for that. So I think it was about sort of balancing what it shows us about how we've got to the point we are at now in politics in 2026, but also how that realization is perhaps quite heavy and hard because it doesn't provide immediate answers or solutions. But I think the fact that the survivors and a few politicians in America who are willing to take a stand in Trump's era, it means that we've got some transparency. And we only know all of this now in a much more factual way because of that.
And you talk about the sacrifice of those who have suffered along the way, in some ways, in some cases, to kind of bring the story to light. People like Victoria Giuffre, who, is that her name? Forgive me, I've got her.
Virginia Roberts.
Virginia Roberts Giuffre, yeah, who, really battled and fought to bring her case into the public light, and who sadly appears to have taken her own life. And that pain, that trauma replicated across so many people who have been hurt in this scandal, because we can talk about it in vague, abstract terms, in terms of the finance, in terms of the political fallout and so on. But there were real people badly, tragically harmed along the way in this story.
Yeah, absolutely. And those survivors have not really had a choice to turn away from the realities of what happened to them, even if it has come at huge personal cost to keep telling the truth. And I think that that's a moment of inspiration. I find I take a lot from that as a journalist. A lot of the work we do, and you know this, Adrian, especially here at Byline Times, it is heavy. It is dense. It reveals a lot of things that could leave you feeling there is no point. Just the Epstein files, like all of how elite power works in the 21st century, how it protects itself again and again. I mean, in some ways you'd want to just give up and think, what is the point in doing what we do? But I think the survivors of Epstein didn't have that choice. And so even when it is hard, what they've shown us is that you do have to still believe that we can be working towards what is right, even if, again, justice may still be hard won. Justice may still not come. Prosecutions may still not happen immediately or in the near future. But I think holding on to that belief that we can move towards what is right, and we must keep speaking out about that, I think that's what's really powerful, and the sort of wider lesson we should take from the Epstein files. We only have them, and we can only begin to piece together a better understanding because those survivors kept speaking truth to power, power that has abused and has corrupted itself many times over. And so I think actually Darkness Visible, which is our theme for this latest print edition, I hope readers come away not feeling depressed, but not only depressed, but with some sense of we can keep moving towards the truth.
And journalistically, that is the exciting thing, if that's the right word, the fact that we are now seeing some light here. Obviously, what has been revealed so far has been heavily redacted. We know there is more to know, more to understand by far what has gone on. But nevertheless, people like journalists at Byline Times and others are combing over the fine detail of what is out there, bringing new things to life all the time, bringing new things to light all the time. And that will hopefully at some point lead to a whole series of individual reckonings and maybe a bigger reckoning as well for the whole system, the whole misogynistic system that has allowed this to flourish.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned Peter Mandelson and Andrew Mountbatten Windsor. I mean, who would have thought in British public life that, we've had really big developments here in the UK because of the release of the Epstein files. That is by no means nothing. Morgan McSweeney, a very controversial figure who you've discussed many times before, Adrian, who would have thought he would be gone? And so that will probably shift maybe the internal dynamics of the Labour Party, for example. So I think in that sense, it has been already very significant. But this wider sense of what is being exposed, I think alongside the abuse, the sexual abuse of women, misogyny, what is also being exposed is the contempt that elite power works on. I mean, in this edition, I write about the then Prince Andrew's interview with Newsnight in 2019, just a few months after Epstein was found dead in a New York prison. And I mean, everyone's seen it. We all know what was said, the various alibis that were given as to why he could not have met Virginia Giuffre as a 17-year-old who was trafficked to him because he was at a Pizza Express in Woking, because he had lost the ability to sweat during the Falklands War. And, his explanation for why he continued to see Jeffrey Epstein or was pictured with him after Epstein's conviction was he had a tendency to be too honorable and felt he needed to go in person to say to Epstein that they shouldn't be seen together anymore. He stayed in his New York townhouse on that visit. He was a guest of honor at the dinner party, but he just maintained, I never met this woman. And one of the emails that has come to light in the latest tranche of the Epstein files is one labeled draft message from Ghislaine Maxwell to Jeffrey Epstein, saying that it's redacted, but referring to Virginia Giuffre, and that a photograph was taken when she met Prince Andrew. And we all knew that was the case. We knew that photo hadn't been doctored, as Prince Andrew tried to claim it could have been. We knew that. And so for me, it really just, all of this showcases the utter contempt by which people in positions of elite power hold the rest of us and expect us to believe these alternative explanations, believe that nothing can ever touch their power. And it's actually that feeling of paralysis and powerlessness that we all have that keeps that system in place. And I think the biggest message from the work Byline Times is doing around this and going forward is if we switch off, if we allow ourselves to believe that nothing can ever change, that nothing is a seminal moment, that Mandelson and McSweeney going and Andrew losing his titles is nothing, then we're still sustaining that system because we are allowing ourselves to be demoralized and to feel like we're just stuck with what we have. So in that way, I think some bigger shifts are still to come as well.
Yeah, well, I couldn't agree with you more. I always find that they're all the same narrative. You can't trust a politician. And of course, there's much in this that would persuade you to believe that you can't trust a politician or those in power. But that's exactly what the Epstein class, to use a phrase that's already cropped up in this conversation, want you to believe. It reinforces their powerlessness, this kind of politics of hopelessness. And one of the reasons I'm proud to be part of the Byline Project is that by shedding light in these dark corners of power and authority, you can rob them of their potency and their power over ordinary people. That power relies partly on our own sense of powerlessness. And we are not powerless. We are not powerless if we combine and if we work together and if we expose them.
And Adrian, something that I found very moving this week after the print edition was published, because in a way, Byline Times is this punches above its weight for sure, but where just this a small dedicated band of people trying to move together towards what is right, what is just, what we can assemble as true and truth. And again, we're just, it'd be easy to think that sometimes our work, how can we keep having impact? How can we, when these such big structural forces around us? And this week, Peter and I received an email from the representatives of the family of Virginia Roberts, her brother, Sky Roberts, who is pictured on the front page. And they would like physical copies of our print edition to be sent to America so they can keep it in their records. And I only say that because, the work we do does matter. It does matter on many levels. And if Peter and I thought it didn't, and there was no hope for the system, we wouldn't be doing this every day. And that's what sustains us. People also ask us, like, how do you keep doing this? Because most people in the world are good. Most people are not Jeffrey Epstein. Most people are like Virginia Giuffre and her brother. And, and so that was I think in 7 years of editing the paper, Peter and I are really proud of this edition and very moved, and that the family would like a copy of this edition to keep for their records.
Yeah, Peter, talking about punching above our weight, I know our political editor, Adam Bienkoff, is listening in as well. And we're aware, aren't we, that some of our coverage and some of Adam's excellent coverage exposing the myth of Morgan McSweeney, the way in which he supposedly took on the far right, which helped to build his mystique and helped to build his profile with Sir Keir Starmer. So much of that was embroidered, so much of that was built up, and our coverage exposing that, puncturing that myth, if you like, primarily by Adam, was being circulated by Labour MPs before his fall. So, we were instrumental in that, albeit that we are still a relatively small news organisation.
I must pay tribute to Peter Oborn's diary. Peter Oborn spotted his diary in the print edition. We compiled quite voluminous columns on Morgan McSweeney over the last nearly 2 years. And he said, when Sue Gray was basically ousted in Morgan McSweeney's favour, the things were going wrong. Now, we know that McSweeney was close to Mandelson. He pushed him forward despite these doubts as ambassador. We also know he's quite close to somebody else who's close to Steve Bannon, i.e. Maurice Glassman, Lord Glassman. I think the revelations to me about Mandelson were some of the most stunning, only that I have met him a couple of times. And I think hardly...
Not in his underpants, I hope, Peter.
Sorry?
Not in his underpants.
No. In a public occasion, at a party and a lecture. There's quite a story to be told one day about the party. But anyway, moving rapidly on, he does exude contempt. And I thought, okay, this is a very sad, slightly lost man. And then you see him angling for these $1 million jobs, him cavorting around in St. Petersburg and Moscow, with introducing Oleg Deripaska, the now sanctioned Russian oligarch, to Epstein. And you realize, he said once he was intensely relaxed with rich people. Well, he bloody well was. And that this explains a lot. I mean, I'm not saying, I make no allegations that he had any involvement in this, but we always perplexed why the Labour Rejoin movement fell apart. And, that didn't come to fruition in 2019. We're perplexed what was this blockage on Labour or any other government investigating Russian interference. Well, I don't know if he did, but Madison seems to be intensely relaxed actually with Brexit, which Epstein vocably enjoys. He sees it as chaos. His disaster capitalism can make money. He's loving Brexit, and intensely relaxed with the Russians. So that to me was quite a revelation. And just before on the wider sort of picture, we're still investigating about Bannon, about Peter Thiel, and the whole tech element, extraordinary things there which we're uncovering. Just to go back and pay tribute, to that family. You read her book, Amy Wallace, we interviewed. I mean, she didn't want to go forward. She sort of forgot about it. But there's a moment that after about 10 years trying to escape it all, other victims come forward. And she has to do it for that. It wasn't for her own recompense. And it killed her, probably, that stress of that. And you can remember, these are dark people. These Epstein, when he was trafficking her, there's another word for it, and she was abused teenager by a family abuse, and he spotted that. She had a photograph of her kid brother, Sky, who wants the paper, and said, I know where he goes to school. She was doted. She doted on her kid brother. So these people were rich, powerful, incredibly well-connected, very wealthy. I mean, we underestimate the kind of money that Epstein could throw around. That's why people like, all these politicians, all these tech would come to him. He knew how to launder money, had 2 islands, had the biggest house in New York, had one of the bigger apartments in Paris. This guy was incredibly wealthy, and they looked away. And they looked away in the dark. I mean, the thing is, what is described sort of crassly as sort of sort of young escorts, or some terrible Atlantic piece called them sugar babes. There's the total exploitation of money and patriarchy there, but then you go to this much darker side, like the threat to Virginia's brother, and you go to this. There's a picture of Bannon, who's trying to sort of exonerate himself now in the New York Times. There's several pictures of him sitting on a desk. One, he's drinking up tea. To the side, if he leant forward, he would see a picture of him. It's kind of weird, 2 pictures of very young girls lying, tied up. I can't even figure out what's going on there. And he turned a blind eye. And the paradox I'm just thinking about, writing a bit about this now, is that what did Epstein do along with Peter Thiel? What was he doing in 2016? He was helping and passing on, actually, the WikiLeaks link to Peter Thiel. And Peter Thiel was of these super PACs who were coming up with this story of a Democratic pedophile ring. And these spirit dinners that they were eating children. And this is why they're all the same. Hillary Clinton was not part of a pedophile ring, though that was a belief of many voters there, thanks to the power of this tech unleashed by people like Peter Thiel and Bannon. But Jeffrey Epstein was. And they knew it by this point because he was convicted in 2008-9. So it's both it's upsetting, and we should be upset. We don't know we know people, their lives were traumatized. Some self-harm, some committed suicide, but maybe other casualties of that. But that sense that, you carry the torch forward, because people like Virginia Roberts Giuffre wanted it to come out, right? And it coming out, it's not justice, but transparency. We always used to talk this with Alistair Morgan, whose brother Daniel Morgan was murdered in a car park. It was tied up police corruption. He knew he'd never get the bad guys, but he'd get transparency. And somehow that light you can see how cleansing it is. Oh, all scuttling away, not in America, though Larry Summers has left his job. All his associates, when exposed by this light, do scuttle away like insects under a rock. And in that way, that is what journalism is for. And not just journalism in the classic, investigative journalist tying up the dot. The journal, the diary that Virginia wrote, that is an act of disclosure, an act of bravery, an act of shining a torch in darkness, which many years later has caused the fall of potentates and the shaking of empires, including New Labour.
And I think we just should also caution, Peter, as well, is that this wasn't just about sex abuse, although that clearly was a significant part of the, in inverted commas, attraction for Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell and so on. People were drawn to that circle even if they had no interest in paedophilia. They were drawn to that circle because of the potential financial assistance that they saw Epstein giving them, perhaps not directly, but through the very wealthy people that he knew. It was also about bringing prestige. People could hang out with movie stars and so on. So it was a very kind of interconnected world where individuals would be drawn to it by their single interests.
Yes.
Hope to get something, that may not have been sexual gratification.
No, let me make it clear. I'm not saying they partook, all these people. I'm saying, but they knew about, by 2008, they knew about it. He was he was on the sex offenders list, right? So they turned a blind eye. That didn't bother them. When Steve Bannon is leaning over a cup of tea in this picture card, it didn't bother them. I'm not saying Steve Bannon, had anything to do with actual abuse. There are a number of, people alleged in Victoria's book who did, senior people who were called co-conspirators in these redacted documents. But no, and what is amazing about Epstein is, Hardeep and I discussed this but he was into everything. I mean, he's like a sort of moral inversion of a Renaissance man. He was in the arts, patron of galleries. He was in the music business. He was in Hollywood, Woody Allen. He was in finance, the world and politics, and particularly tech. I mean, the clear trajectory after that first conviction, maybe some of New York society, whatever, some of that society shuns him. He retreats a bit. So what he really makes an angle for is Silicon Valley. And they keep on meeting him. People like Musk, who's the owner of X and founder of SpaceX, like Peter Thiel, Palantir co-founder, PayPal co-founder. There's even a picture with Zuckerberg. He makes a real beeline into the tech world. There's John Brockman, this agent. He's meeting people like Steven Pinker. He's going to all these dinners of these Bay Area thinkers, this sort of big tech and sometimes genetics world. And the other thing he is definitely making a move towards is Russia. And there is a joint interest. He's in contact with a very senior FSB member, Sergei Belyakov, who's apparently close to Putin. He's constantly talking about, I want to meet Putin privately. And there's questions, does he meet Vladimir Putin, the president of Russia? And it's quite clear they have contact because he tells both Jagland, this Søren Jagland, senior Norwegian diplomat, and Ehud Barak, former prime minister of Israel, that he's been talking to Putin and they've been in contact. And this is weeks before both Jagland and Barak are going to meet Putin, right? So he's not going to lie to them because they go, Vlad, did you talk to Jeffrey? And no, what are you talking about? So that is quite extraordinary. We have a direct connection to Trump world. I mean, he wasn't very close to Trump. He was close to Trump, but not after 2008. Straight to Silicon Valley, straight to Larry Summers, Woody Allen, Bill Gates. It is the world. It's quite extraordinary X-ray of a world which we've been skirting around the edges. We've sort of taken little snaps off, and it's there. It wasn't made up. There was a conspiracy. And it wasn't, the global elites weren't the ones Bannon were talking about. It was the global elite he was part of.
To your point, Adrian, about the people who were gravitating towards Epstein, even if they were not partaking in the sexual abuse, I think a really striking example of that is Sarah Ferguson, Fergie, the former Prince Andrew's former wife, who has remained in public life all these years, benefited from her royal links. And I think today several of her companies, it's been reported, are now winding down, book deals, all sorts of money that she was making off of her status. But what's extraordinary is that when Jeffrey Epstein has his first conviction, she goes on the record and tells the Evening Standard newspaper that she abhors sexual abuse and she regrets having anything to do with Jeffrey Epstein. She'll never talk to him again. And what the Epstein files reveal is that she does that on the record, on the public record. But then there's correspondence about how she felt so bad about saying that and she had to say it. And that she wants to maintain a relationship with Epstein. I mean, I don't know, even no matter how long you've worked in journalism or, any equivalent profession, just it's still so stark, to see that. That is what's going on. And I think we all have an instinct of that. I think I'm like sort of zooming out onto the bigger picture of people, the sort of lack of trust, which is defining so much of the era we're in terms of politics and institutions, in politicians, trust in anything ever being able to get any better. I think people sense it in their gut that these sorts of things are going on and that there's a contempt towards them. And I do keep coming back to this word contempt because I just think it's dehumanizing, like to expect everybody to go along with a system which has quite clearly corrupting elements. And I'm not saying everybody who's powerful is like Jeffrey Epstein, but there were so many people who are powerful who wanted to be connected to him, like Sarah Ferguson, willing to overlook things, say one thing in public, privately I'm going to keep the friendship, privately I need money, I need status. And it's just, I think the contempt the public feels for people in public life, in positions of power, I think that becomes clearer to me why that exists, why it exists. And so that's been very revelatory as well, in quite a stark and simple way, that no wonder people feel there is no point increasingly, there's no point participating in any of this, because no matter what happens, we're the saps who have to go along with everything, while people like Sarah Ferguson, say one thing to the papers and do another thing completely privately. She knew he was a sex offender and apologized to him for it just, there's no way around that. There's no way around that,
Yeah. As we're recording this, I'm sitting here in my living room in Birmingham, an area which, like many industrial parts of the UK, has seen its manufacturing, if not wiped out, then certainly significantly denuded. And there was a period from Thatcher onwards when we were told that the financial sector and services would be the future for Britain. And I know in various ways through the Byline Times, we've exposed the City of London, the London laundromat, cleaning dirty money and so on. And in my book, my Byline Times book, Where's the Money Gone? The Battle for the Soul of English Football, I talk about the role of money, particularly cleaning Russian money in the 2010s. And you kind of think, okay, well, maybe that was a historical phenomenon. But in this episode of Byline Times, Ian Overton looks at how the City of London facilitated so much of what Epstein was up to, so much of his financial dealings. And as I say, I draw the comparison to where I'm sitting now in Birmingham, in the sense that, people around here would talk about good, honest work. And I'm not saying that the financial sector isn't good, honest work in some circumstances, but that sense that we can have this massively important sector now to which we have directed so much of our national resource and attention, acting as a facilitator for somebody like Jeffrey Epstein.
It's funny. It's not funny. It's deeply disturbing. There's a Peter, I can't remember his book, but this guy, theorist of history, and he says, where are the revolutionary moments? And he gets when you get vast inequality. Because first you get, it's called the immiseration of the populace, that most people feel relatively poor. They're not in their islands. They're not flying on jets, not staying at a Paris apartment or getting Rolex watches. But he said the more challenging thing is that as you get more inequality, and we've seen, especially since the bailout, this quantitative easing just poured billions into asset speculation and the things that benefited the already hyper rich. So billionaires, tax cuts from Trump, have got richer and richer. Is they begin to two things they do. One is they begin to compete with each other because there's too many billionaires, right? They can't all control the government, so they start fighting each other. And they get different cliques fighting. And that's what he said, the French Revolution, the Russian Revolution, in a way, you had an overpopulation of elites. But the start thing, I think, is what seemed like a liberal, hippie, good notion thing, like, the sort of early days of Apple, and they're making these computers in these, not like IBM, like this horrible big brother. They're making it in their garages. The internet comes along and it's all, everybody's peer to peer. It's this great act of democracy. It's in 20 years, those monopolists, because they are monopolists, they're all big from, Google, Facebook, Meta, Airbnb, Uber. They all have these rather worrying names, slightly Germanic too. That they become, their ideology changes. They get richer and more powerful. They become more, well, we're genetically superior. What are all these? They take over this Curtis Yard and think, well, who needs states? Who needs democracy? Actually, why don't we run countries like we are CEOs? And eventually they end up on Epstein Island, right? And not saying that Peter Thiel went directly there. They end up in this sort of weird orbit of billionaires who think they're above everything. And the billionaires then, and we've seen it in British politics, we're seeing it, I think, with Farage and Reform now, think, well, I'm going to play in politics because if I'm Elon Musk and I can get the government to, give me access to all this or get a contract, or even more, if I can get the American government to turn on Europe for regulating me, I'm quids in. And you get this merger between the billionaire class, the oligarch class, and government. And so that's the other story, because he is really, Trump isn't in that way, and neither Boris, any other figures in British politics, clearly oligarchs or oligarch close to being an oligarch like Epstein was. So you get a real insight into that hedge fund, because he's making lots of money from Brexit. Whenever there's a war, there's, I can make some money on this. This idea that capitalism there, rather to make things, make cars or rivets or whatever, the sort of 19th century idea of capitalism for its capacity was to make stuff. This is disaster capitalism. This celebrates turmoil. This celebrates dysfunction in government and encourages it. He says about Brexit, basically, he says this to Peter Thiel, writes this to Peter Thiel. It's going to be great. It's going to be chaos. It's going to be great for us.
Hardim, on the political dimension, of course, there's this whole suggestion as well that we had people who were close to Epstein working to topple Theresa May. That's something that you cover in the latest print edition.
Yeah, I mean, again, Peter and Adam on our, the team has been looking at this for years. Very striking to have it again typed out in front of us, to just see how Steve Bannon was sort of running around most of Europe in that era, trying to set up far-right movements all over the place, but also taking a very direct interest in British politics, very much so. So obviously Theresa May, that sort of short-lived government trying to get Brexit sort of done. She never could. And Boris Johnson was there, Foreign Secretary, in touch with Bannon. Bannon was in touch with Epstein. Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot more to that. I suspect, and as Peter does, that it's tip of the iceberg. Some of the emails, there's a few, but I suspect that there's a lot more to come out about that. But yeah, I mean, I think, again, drawing back to the political dimension in terms of these disruptive things that we have seemingly inexplicably experienced. I think it's a combination of things, right? I think it's exactly what we're talking about something, about a fundamental disengagement and lack of trust and contempt, which breeds anger that people feel, which makes them turn to figures who offer them certain things, populist figures, authoritarian figures, as it turns out. But I think the other part of this is just on a practical level, the various individuals involved in shaping some of these movements. And I think that's quite interesting to see, because it's easy to dismiss sort of, oh, this all conspiracy theory. Well, it's not when you've got two people emailing each other saying, I've just talked to Boris. And, I think where we can position him and May's going, which is exactly what ended up happening. I mean, just to come back to this point about, I really liked your point about London, Adrian, and Birmingham. I really liked that. I thought it was really pertinent. I'm reading a book I've read many times at the moment before, which is not to do with this at all. It's called All About Love by Bell Hooks. It's a really beautiful book. And the reason I bring it up is she talks about love, but we can also call that compassion for one's fellow man, an appreciation of humanity, an appreciation of people as people. And she discusses in one of the chapters why love seems to be lacking in the world around us. And she obviously talks about politics. She talks about domination and power. Really interesting and basic thing to point out here with Epstein is power and money and abuse seems to go hand in hand. So this need to dominate, this need to feel superior and think you're above it all. But she talks also generally in I would say quite a common sense way, but even reading it was striking, about our consumerist, hyper-capitalist culture in which we live. And to Peter's point, since the financial crash and growing inequality, she's essentially saying that consumerist culture, which is not just, it's marketing, it's advertising, it's the mass media, it's politics, it's the fact that film stars are the only really, people in public life who are put on pedestals and followed. What happened to all the inspiring activists of our age? Jesse Jackson's just died today. She basically talks about this notion that the world in which we tend to live in countries like the United States and the UK is built on this notion that we are things, not people. And certainly Epstein saw all the people he used as things, not people. So we're things, not people. And instead of having a depth in our life that comes from genuinely connecting as people, we are constantly feeding our desires and cravings in a material sense, right? And this is backed up by the entire system in which we live, where we're told, if we just have more of these things, we will feel better. And it never really does it, beyond a certain point. And I guess I bring this up because I've just been reading it, but I always like to draw these and situate these discussions in something about the wider, and I've said this before, this kind of dehumanizing culture in which we live. And what I mean by that is we're not people, we're things. And I think the Epstein story really sadly illuminates that truth and how it is linked to a society in which power and money is what we are all sort of nudged towards wanting to have at the expense of other things, I think, which are much more fundamental and important and human.
I'd just add to that observation, Hardeep, from our fun cover. I haven't got the physical, so it's arriving today. We have a picture of Ghislaine Maxwell with Jeffrey Epstein, Melania Trump, and Donald Trump. And if you wanted the ne plus ultra of bling, of treating people like objects, of riches without value, things have no merit. The Donald Trump administration, which, sort of really Epstein also embodies, is part of that. Now, on the one end, you get the abuse of minors, this treatment of people like they're disposable objects, things. And that to me is the basis of evil. When I've seen people, I've really thought, watch out for that person, whether it's is they look at other people as things. Right. And that's where morality begins and ends. And I'm sure, had you or I met Jeffrey and said, he'd be a charming sociopath, I'm sure, but you would have hit that moment. You felt this person treats you like things. But, we have an American, and not so bad here. I mean, there are elements of it, and I'm glad Madison had gone because that was a big element of it. But a whole of the White House is knocking down bits of the White House to put some sort of ridiculous ballroom. It's, he's promoting this movie from his wife, which clearly is just, and hopefully this is the kind of apogee, or nadir, of this commodification you're talking about, because people aren't like that. People do say, well, I don't want to work so much hard and earn this extra money. I want to spend time with my kids or whatever it is. But the Instagram world, the electronic, the sort of tech world we inhabit, thanks to people like Musk and Thiel and other Epstein associates, has gone that way. And maybe, this just shows you where it leads. You sometimes need an extreme lesson in the abuses of power. See where the road leads all the way down. With Epstein, we are in some dark, very dark places, to understand that the first steps of that are just treating people like objects, whether they're, as employees or as partners.
Yeah, well, I'm just trying to draw all these threads together before we close. I'm just thinking, the one thread that runs through all this is the sense of entitlement, of superiority. Clearly, Epstein had that, and he believed that his sex bought him that entitlement. He believed that his wealth bought him that entitlement. And even without the element of sexual exploitation, and just to be clear here, I'm not accusing the next group of people I'm going to mention of any kind of sexual exploitation, but the people who you mentioned, the Bannons, the Teals, this sense that, with Bannon trying to interfere with UK and European politics, that now is encoded in the US national security strategy, which gives the United States its own self-appointed authority to try and promote what we would regard as far-right parties, nativist parties in Europe. It's like, where does this sense of authority and of entitlement end? Jeffrey Epstein is simply a very vile example of a mindset that is all too common, particularly at the top of the United States in terms of politics and business.
But you see, J.D. Vance, who came and berated Europe for their free speech laws, is a product of Thiel. He was basically backed as a senator by Thiel. We have Elon Musk trying to bring the government down, saying that, Americans only should have Scottish, Irish, English values, or sort of like forgetting the blues, rock and roll, Italian filmmakers, the great traditions of Jewish, novelists and things like that. And I think, he is the model for them. That, he had that entitlement. They've continued, and the mechanism. So it's not quite clear, but it looks like that Bannon was being funded by Thiel through some cryptocurrency. I'm not establishing that as a fact. It's some worthy investigation. So he was pouring money into this ecosystem, which now is dominant on places like X, which is trolling, which is inauthentic accounts, influence brokers, disaster capitalism. Apparently, I think Musk helped towards is Rupert Lowe's new movie, is in the countryside. We're living still in that world very much of media power, this new media power, not the media power of Murdoch, but the power of the platforms, which in a way is greater and much more covert, the way they spend their money. At least I always like comparing Rupert Murdoch and Elon Musk, but at least Rupert Murdoch did spend some time in newspapers, like in the 50s, were the Express, and understood them before he took them over, whatever he did with them. Elon Musk has taken over the town hall, the world's town hall, as it's called. And he's built space rockets and cars. Look, Von Braun, who built the Apollo rocket, imagine he took over the New York Times or took over CBS. Well, yeah, Ralph Ellison's taking over. We have an extraordinary, because they're successful, because they hate criticism, because they think they're know-it-alls. We have people who are obviously good at making money and sometimes good at tech platforms with them, thinking they can dominate what we say and think. And that is just that. And Epstein was the precursor of that.
Final thought, Hadi?
I think my final thought is I really hope that here in the UK, and obviously we've already, in some ways unexpectedly, already had some developments following the release of the Epstein files. But to this point that you talk about, as to what is going on at the top of United States government, I just really hope that in the 3 or 4 years that follow here in the United Kingdom, that we watch closely, and that we are able to learn some lessons here, that we understand who these figures are. Steve Bannon, a lot of, has a relationship with Nigel Farage. that is surely of interest when you consider how seminal Steve Bannon has been in the MAGA movement coming to power in America. Surely that is relevant. It's just something as we were talking that really struck me when we were talking about treating people as things rather than people. And I mean, there's much I could say, but just to take one example, I found, so there were so many, I guess I call them allegations of racism that have been reported against Nigel Farage as a schoolboy. Now, we're not talking one or two people. I mean, I don't have the exact figure. I believe it's near 20 or more than 20 people alleging very similar behavior. And again, let's just look at how he treat these people as people making allegations, or did he just dismiss them and change his story and sort of act as if, well, it's got nothing to do with me, what is being said? I don't know. I think I think we need to have our eyes open to the character of people, the moral character of people, because if nothing else, this story about Jeffrey Epstein is a story of the consequences of where moral depravity gets you.
Good to speak to you, Hardeep. Thank you for your time, editor of the Byline Times. Thanks also to Peter Jukes, Byline Times co-founder and executive editor. This latest print edition of the Byline Times will be dropping on people's doormats, Royal Mail permitting. When, Hardeep?
Today, tomorrow. Yeah.
Oh, mine hasn't.
Yeah, next 24 hours.
Mine hasn't come yet, but my new bank card was about 4 days late. So fingers crossed it arrives in the post tomorrow or this afternoon, because who knows when the post is coming these days. And it will also be available at select newsstands as well. So do make sure, if you haven't got a subscription, that you head down to your local newsstand and buy it, and then take out a subscription. If you want to take out a subscription, go to bylinetimes.com. That's where you'll find all the details, our news-breaking website, bylinetimes.com. And as you'll hear, you'll know that we're already active on Substack as well. And if you're listening on the podcast, don't forget to hit subscribe on that too. It's free, by the way, to subscribe to the podcast, though not to the Byline Times. Thanks, Hardy. Thanks, Peter. We'll see you all again soon. Cheers now. Bye-bye.